Picked up by Westbrook. Westbrook on the return. Here comes Westbrook. He's got a lead. Here comes Westbrook. He gets by. Brian Westbrook going all the way. Touchdown, Eagles. Touchdown, Denver Smith. The catch of the year. Rivers' throw is intercepted by Leonard. And the Jets are set up in the red zone. Deshaun Jackson gets a block. Are you kidding? Deshaun Jackson still not in, and now in for the touchdown, no flags.
Welcome everyone to the debut of the Code Green radio show, brought to you by Yahoo Sports Philly and InterstateOfGreen.com. We'll also be sure to thank our wonderful sponsors along the way. Let me start with introductions. I'm your host, Rich Wilhelm. With me tonight, I have Craig Gorbunoff, Alex Hand, and Frankie Vittorini. For everyone not familiar with the show, we are basically the first Jets and Eagles site that can coexist. When we started, it was unknown if the formula would work, and as you can tell by the radio show, we were pleasantly surprised how well it actually did work. We have some great topics for you tonight, including the Super Bowl 50, our Fan Digs debate of the night involving Fitzpatrick versus Kaepernick, recent Eagles signings and cuts, and Jets' future contracts, including finally signing a kick returner. So let's jump right into it. Craig, what did you think of Peyton's possible last hurrah raising the Lombardi Trophy?
Yeah, Rich, the Sheriff had a very interesting last game of the season. More than likely his career, but, he liked to keep us guessing a little bit at the end there, saying he wasn't going to make an emotional decision. He had a pretty decent performance. It wasn't anything spectacular, but it was pretty much what we were expecting. He had the one interception there. He played as close to mistake-free football as he could. He didn't win the game for them, but he certainly didn't lose the game. And that defense really had his back. And the real key thing that I think was the difference between this year's Denver Super Bowl team and 2 years ago when they played Seattle was all these different players on the defense that weren't injured. Guys like Von Miller and Chris Harris Jr. were there on defense that weren't there against Seattle. And really, this defense won the Super Bowl for Denver. Alex, what did you see when you were watching the game from the Denver perspective?
The highlights that I took note of during Super Bowl 50 were, as you made a point on, Wade Phillips' defense absolutely carried this team from week one up until they hoisted the Lombardi Trophy. Another thing I noticed on the Carolina side, their defense was also ranked fairly high coming into this game. It did show up, but it clearly wasn't enough for the Carolina Panthers. They didn't do enough offensively. And speaking of the offensive side for the Panthers, I think this game put an exclamation point on the fact that they don't have any explosive wide receivers, and as we saw in the last couple of years, is that they don't have very healthy amounts of depth on the offensive line, and those are two very important positions, especially for a Super Bowl championship winning team. And I think that showed through Super Bowl 50.
Yeah, and Frankie, when we're talking about the Panthers, when they lost Kelvin Benjamin in training camp, everyone kind of wrote this team off, and yet somehow during the regular season and the majority of the playoffs, it didn't seem to matter. But in the Super Bowl, it really showed the lack of a true number one receiver. What were your sort of thoughts on the struggling Carolina offense?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see because, first off, I want to say thank you to everyone out there listening and for putting this great show together. I'm proud to be part of this show. We're going to kick ass, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But what you notice happens in Super Bowls, and it's happened to a lot of offenses. I mean, it happened to Peyton back in, to the 13-14 season when, the Seahawks smacked them and beat them in a defensive-oriented game. When offenses like that end up getting to the Super Bowl, the lights are a little brighter. The pressure's a little bit more. You get a little more tense. You're not as free-flowing as you were during the season. Not to mention you're playing against a defense like that I think is still underrated if you look at what they did throughout the season. I mean, they were flying around all year, a little bit underappreciated, I think, because a lot of the conversation surrounding Denver had to do with Peyton and his struggles, and even C.J. Anderson before the season had some things he was saying. So you had a lot more focus on the offensive side of the ball there. But what happens in these Super Bowls, I think, and you know, it even happened to the Patriots when they lost to the Giants in 2007. I mean, you have offenses that are so free-flowing. When things get a little tense and they don't get those early big plays, you see that they start thinking a little bit too much. And Benjamin would have been great for this team on Sunday, but I do think the issue there was I don't think they wouldn't have got to the Super Bowl if Kelvin Benjamin was healthy all year. I just don't think they would have. I think Cam playing free, playing without having to force the ball to a number one receiver, which I think hurts some quarterbacks, having to force the ball to that number one guy. And what happened was when the lights got a little brighter in the Super Bowl and when things, when it became more of a game where you tried to not make mistakes, which it seems like a lot of teams do in these big games, defense always, you know, quote unquote wins championships. And I just think that Denver defense was unbelievable. Even if you look at the numbers, I mean, Cam had his lowest completion percentage, 43.9% since 2012 in a loss, Week 5 loss to Seattle. Another, you know, juggernaut of a defense, but then it was the first time all season Cam didn't score a touchdown. So for the first time we saw Cam not, you know, dab or not get into the flow of things, and it just really threw them off, and they were down 3-0. It was the first time they had been trailing, I think, in I don't know, I saw a stat. I think
Frankie,
it was all postseason.
it was the entire postseason. It was the first time that the Panthers had trailed, and you're right, Super Cam sort of showed his got fed his kryptonite by the Denver Bronco defense. Rich, you know, we talked a lot before this game, and you know, you were under the impression that the Panthers were going to destroy the Broncos, and not for nothing, I thought so too. I just happened to pick the Broncos because I wanted Peyton Manning to ride off into the sunset. But what did you think about the Super Bowl 50?
Well, let me just start by saying I was completely wrong. I was wrong on so many fronts of this game. The fact that the Panthers gave up 7 sacks, it was crazy. It was just all night Cam was getting hit. Von Miller as the MVP, much deserved. I mean, it was a perfect storybook ending. If you had to, you know, write it, you couldn't write it any better than how it ended last night. You know, Peyton Manning walks off with a Lombardi trophy. He did not have a very good game. I mean, he went 13 of 23 for 141 yards, and he had an interception. Most games, you have those stats, you lose. But the Denver defense just completely, you know, it took over the game. The thing that was so confusing to me, I think it's confusing to a lot of people, there was a formula the Panthers had all year long where Cam would just run if he wanted to run. And that didn't happen. I know there was a lot of pressure on Sunday, but he just didn't take off. He stood in the pocket. He took the sacks. That's just not Cam Newton, the Cam Newton that I saw all year. I think the pressure got to him. I mean, he's a really young quarterback. You can tell based on the way he was acting on the field, he really wanted to win, but the maturity level I don't think is there yet. I think it will be. I think he's going to continue to be a great quarterback. I think he's going to make it to at least one more Super Bowl. But Sunday, it's just the game was so one-sided, and I don't think it was a very good game. I'm going to be honest.
I liked it. I kind of liked it.
You liked it? I mean, you're a defensive-minded guy.
Yeah.
I like seeing some points, obviously, but you can say it's kind of like a national championship game. When the two teams go against each other, usually the score is not that high. Like an LSU game where it's like 9-3. That's how this game felt to me. And they say defense wins championships, and they are completely right on Sunday.
Well, just to throw in a number that's pretty crazy, it was the first time ever in Super Bowl history that a team had won with less than 200 yards of total offense. Previously, there were 7 teams that have had less than 200 yards of total offense in a Super Bowl, and they all lost. And Denver was actually the first team to ever win a Super Bowl with less than 200 yards of total offense. So that's just crazy to think about altogether, if you look at the numbers. And Carolina, I mean, in my opinion, the biggest difference in the game was, and I said it before, will Jonathan Stewart be able to run the ball somewhat effectively to open things up in the passing game? And he just wasn't effective at all. I mean, he only had 29 yards. Granted, it was on 12 carries, but he didn't get anything going out, in the run game. And I think that really hurt Carolina, because if he was able to pick up some yards, those safeties will come up. That'll open up some things for Olsen, and then you can have Corey Brown and Ginn kind of running around out there. But if Stewart, once I saw him kind of tiptoeing and not being able to get much going, it just showed that there's nowhere to go with the ball. You have Harris and Talib on Philly Brown and Ted Ginn. I mean, that's a matchup nightmare for them. I mean, as much as I like those guys, I think Corey Brown actually played really good. He actually reminds me of an Eagles receiver, kind of. I feel like he'd be like someone that like McNabb would have played with back in the day. But it's just that's a bad matchup for them. So they're gonna take those guys out like in a matchup, and it's gonna come down to Stewart. I thought, Olsen I thought would get his, and then it came down to, I think, Stewart not being able to run the ball. And, who else are they going to go to? Whitaker and Tolbert? I mean, so it was a bad matchup for Carolina, and I was shocked at the spread. I mean, like,
now, Frankie,
they were giving them five.
You made a mention of this, Frankie, and Rich, you touched on it as well, that the lights might have been too bright for this game. How much of that do you actually think played a hand? Cam, we saw, maybe a little bit shaken toward the tail end of the game, but with Philly Brown's concussion halfway through the game, as well as the issues on O-line throughout the season, and overall a lack of an explosive wide receiver, couple that putting all the weight on Cam Newton's shoulders against this Wade Phillips defense, do you think that had more of an effect? Was it lights too bright, or was it an issue of personnel? Craig, I want to ask you first.
I think that the Panthers really, I think, just it's not their time yet. They're too young of a team. They're not mature enough. Rich brought up a Cam before, and maybe it was too much for him. His maturity level's not there. He wasn't running like we were accustomed to seeing. Personally, I think that was maybe a little bit more by design. You don't want your star quarterback getting injured in the Super Bowl. I know that wasn't really a factor during the regular season, but it may have come into play a little bit when facing off against Denver. But I just don't think it was their time, whereas Denver had been to the Super Bowl 2 years before. This team was battle-tested. They had their ups and downs. But at the end of the day, Carolina doesn't have all the pieces together. There's holes in their roster. And, they got outplayed by Denver.
Rich?
I think it was a combination. Wade Phillips, I mean, he's one of the best defensive minds in the game. And he got his party on Sunday. If you guys saw the video or the pictures, he definitely well deserved. And he's humble. He's not going to go for any more head coaching jobs based on what he's saying. He's content being a defensive coordinator because that's what he's good at. I honestly think it's a split right down the middle. Cam Newton, he was on a roll. The coaches and everyone bought in. Obviously, they're doing the dab. I don't see anything wrong with that. You're celebrating, you're dancing, whatever. But the immaturity on the team, you can see. There's no real structure on that team because they were winning so many games. I feel if they lost a couple more games during the season, they would have put Cam Newton more in a structured role. But then the big game comes and everyone's having a good time, and then you're just getting smacked around by Wade Phillips. So, like Craig said, I don't think they're mature enough to win right now. I don't think they're going to be back next year if I had to make an early prediction, but I think within the next 5 years they're going to win the Super Bowl. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
And Frankie, what are your thoughts on why Carolina couldn't get it done in our sort of last minute here before we take our first break?
I mean, yeah, I think the lights were a little bit too bright. I think they played, they were a little bit more conservative than usual, and that came from the head coach on down at, the placeholder. I mean, why would you start the game and defer? I mean, like, why would you not take the ball there and want to get Cam Newton, just started early? I mean, like, they chose to kick, and then Peyton and the Broncos drove down and got a field goal, and that was the first time all postseason that, Carolina was trailing. So, and then you look at even the first play of the game was a handoff to Stewart. I know I'm looking a little bit too much into this. I'm talking about first play of the game from Carolina's offense. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, they're just nervous. They kick, they hand the ball off, then they do a little play to Philly Brown. I mean, like you have to do you got to gain momentum instantly in a big game like that. I mean, when Denver lost the Super Bowl, they fumbled. I remember, last time they lost the Super Bowl versus Seattle, they fumbled. Remember Peyton fumbled on the safety was the first play of the game. I mean, that's it. The game Super Bowls are won and lost in a couple plays early on, I think. And it's something where I just think, Denver got their pee-hot, they call it, and they were just coming out with more momentum, and Carolina seemed a little nervous, and that was it. We knew what Wade Phillips was going to do. I mean, it's no surprise Von Miller's there. It's no surprise, DeMarcus Ware is there. You have Danny Trevathan. You have those guys in the secondary. I mean, those guys are there. They've been playing like that pretty much all year. The only team that gave them really trouble all year was the Steelers. And they did an excellent job at starting fast and hot, and Denver was on their toes. That's what Carolina needed to do. When you saw in the first quarter that wasn't happening, and then they fumbled, the fumble return, a touchdown by Denver when Von Miller comes off the end and just basically takes it out of Cam's hand. That was it. I mean, that was game, set, match to me. So,
and what better way to end but on that note? So that's going to be it for the Super Bowl talk. We're going to be back with our Fan Digs debate, and we'll be back with more from WNJC, Yahoo Sports Philly, 1360 AM. Why buy new when you can buy pre-owned?
Skip the depreciation.
At Apollo Auto Sales, they have over 220 cars, ranging from $40,000 all the way down to $2,000.
Yes, you heard that right. $2,000.
Visit ApolloPreowned.com or call 856-881-2869. That number again is 856-881-2869.
Ask for Joey. Apollo treats you like family.
Their prices are sick.
The Shore Conference, located in Ocean and Monmouth County, New Jersey, is home to some of the best high school sports in the country. Yet finding reliable news and analysis has always been difficult. Not anymore. Head over to njsportsreport.com to stay up to date with everything in the Shore Conference. Written by the fans for the fans.
Welcome back to the Code Green Radio Show. I'm your host, Rich Wilhelm. Our next topic is one that we're going to talk about because there's a lot of rumors going around. It is our Fan Digs debate of the night. Fan Digs is an app where you and your friends or you and anyone can debate sports topics. And they're voted on by people outside of your social sphere. So you're going to see if you're good at sports debating or if you're just bad. And this one comes right from Fan Digs. Colin Kaepernick has been linked to the New York Jets. It came out that he wanted to play for the New York Jets and he wanted to be out of San Francisco. Later, a report came out saying that he doesn't want to be out of San Francisco and he doesn't want to come near New York Jets. Like the offseason every year, all these rumors start. We don't know what's yes, we don't know what's no. But, let's have some fun with this. Colin Kaepernick or Ryan Fitzpatrick? Who would you rather have? And I'm going to start with Alex on this one.
Ooh, yay. All right. Now, in my opinion, if I was the general manager for the New York Jets, the best case scenario would be to bring Fitz back because he's familiar with the offense and he's got experience in that offense. And what I mean by that is not so much experience with Shane Gailey and the offense. It's the camaraderie and the brotherhood, if you will, that he's built up with the rest of the offense. I mean, Brandon Marshall's already gone out and said, I don't want another quarterback. I want Fitz on my team. But in all fairness, if you're going to have a backup, your backup better be good as your number one starter. So if you're looking in the free agency pool, because I've said this since day one, this draft is a terrible draft class for quarterbacks, even when the Jets hold the 20th overall pick, which is kind of a meh if you're trying to find a future quarterback. So bringing somebody like Kaepernick in, if he truly is interested, is almost a win-win situation for the Jets.
Yeah, and Alex, I think you make a good point, but for me, I would rather get rid of Ryan Fitzpatrick altogether. And I know a lot of Jets fans don't want to hear that because he broke all of the New York Jets offensive records. But here's the thing. He had an average year for a quarterback. Meanwhile, Colin Kaepernick, I know he didn't have a good year in San Francisco, but the whole team in San Francisco completely collapsed. I mean, without a doubt. Half the offensive line had retired. Their linebackers had retired. The defense that was built, completely fell apart. Their golden years that were while Jim Harbaugh was head coach completely collapsed, and Colin Kaepernick couldn't do the whole thing by himself. I think if you take a guy like Colin Kaepernick, who has a very unique set of skills in terms of athleticism, his arm power, his ability to move on the run, the read option, all of that, you bring that to the New York Jets, and all of a sudden, he's a guy who can win games for you, not lose them. And that's, to me, what Ryan Fitzpatrick is. I know he had a couple of game-winning drives this season, but it wasn't. I never felt good with him having the ball in his hands if we needed a clutch play. I was always kind of on edge. And I would have a little more faith in a young, he was elite at one point in his career. People were talking about him as a top 5 quarterback, and that team just sort of fell apart around him. But I don't necessarily blame him, and I think he can be a really quality quarterback in the NFL.
All right, I got to disagree with you, Greg. Normally we agree on a lot of stuff, but you know how I feel about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick, you mentioned the record thing. He had 31 touchdowns. I'm going to throw it out there. And it's his first year with the team. So that's where I am with that. If he can break records in his first year, I want to see some more chemistry. I want to see him on the team. Like Alex said, Brandon Marshall is enamored with the guy. Brandon Marshall is making it known.
I'm in favor of keeping Brandon Marshall happy, though. So
Exactly. Yeah, like I said, I mean, he's going to leaps and bounds to support Ryan Fitzpatrick, and it's good to see. I mean, when's the last time we had this camaraderie? I would say, like the Pennington Corbett days. I mean, that's not that far back, but I haven't seen it since then. Eric Decker is enamored with Fitzpatrick as well. Nick Mangold, all those after the game celebrations that are caught live on TV saying this is our year. I mean, unfortunately, it wasn't. But the Jets are definitely in the right direction. I wouldn't subtract a piece that doesn't need to be subtracted. There's plenty of players on this team that you can take out and add other players, and I don't see Colin Kaepernick replacing Ryan Fitzpatrick. When I look at mobile quarterbacks, I look at teams like the Seattle Seahawks and the Carolina Panthers. They don't have the wide receivers that the Jets have. That's why they run all the time. Cam Newton ran all year long, and he had Brown and Ginn and Kotry. I mean, I love Kotry, but he's a third receiver. And then you have Seattle. Doug Baldwin came out of nowhere. And Lockett, obviously, he came out of nowhere too. But before that, I mean, there's not any all-star wide receivers. I feel that you're going to be taking away from the productivity of Marshall, of Decker, of Amaro when he comes back, and Nunwa if he starts, and whoever our third wide receiver is going to be, if it's Devin Smith, if it's someone else, if it's someone we draft, if it's someone we acquire. I feel the more years you give Ryan Fitzpatrick, the better everything's going to be.
But here's the thing, Rich. Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't have that many years left in him. He's already on the plus side of 30. In addition to that, too, our running game is going to be significantly different next season as it was this previous season. Odds are Chris Ivory is not going to be back. Maybe they keep Bilal Powell. But I think adding a guy like Colin Kaepernick will open up lanes in the running game as well. Fitzpatrick, he just can't. To me, he's not the future. If anything, he's a stopgap between what we have going on now and what we have going on in the future. And it's just, to me, that's not a solution. Meanwhile, Colin Kaepernick is in the prime of his career. He could be a valued piece for us.
But would you be opposed to the idea that they bring in both quarterbacks to fight it out during the summer?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I don't think you can afford that.
No, there's no money to go around for that. I mean, this year the Jets are going to be kind of strapped. I mean, they can make a lot of moves to open a lot of money, but it's not going to be anything like it was last year. Last year was a spending free-for-all. You can't have cap and Fitz. And that's another thing. I mean, another reason why I'd rather have Fitz is because of his salary. It's not going to come close to Kaepernick. And I don't know, because obviously all sports athletes, they like money. But I don't think Fitz is going to be asking for a contract that's going to blow us away. Because, like you said, he's towards the end of his career. He knows that, and he wants to win.
But to that same point, he knows he's towards the end of his career. He's never had the opportunity to really make all that much money outside of one season in Buffalo. He might want the big money because he's not going to get the big money any other time in his life.
But what are the odds that he actually holds out or stares down general management?
Again, I don't think he would do that, but the flip side of that argument is, well, he's towards the end of his career, he'll probably take a lesser contract, but he might also want a bigger contract because he's towards the end of his career. And given what the QB market is right now, management could be persuaded into overpaying for a quarterback.
Let both quarterbacks fight, not during the summer, but during the offseason. Whoever takes the least amount of money wins.
Yeah, okay, well.
Well, that's going to be Ryan Fitzpatrick. Good, Frankie.
No, I was going to say, I think this comes down to where do we value and what do we think of Colin Kaepernick? And I think that's where we really have to dig in here, because where do we see a 28-year-old quarterback who's been to a Super Bowl, who at a point was considered top 6, 7, quarterbacks in the league. He was almost like Russell Wilson before Russell Wilson. I mean, if you look at how much, he was, how much clout he had at a point, where do we value this guy? And I think Colin Kaepernick can be decent or good if he has a running game. I consider him a quarterback. I call these guys bombs away quarterbacks. These big arm guys that they'll throw screens with the same arm power as they'll throw a 55-yard bomb. They don't really have much touch in the short game. They don't really know how to dink and dunk all that well, but they're really good at throwing the ball deep, and play action's their best friend. Eli, I put in that category, Flacco, Kaepernick. Those guys, when you don't give them a running game, they're done. They're not going to be effective. And you saw it with Eli a little bit. When he doesn't have a running game, he sort of gets thrown off a little bit of his rhythm. Flacco this year had an awful season. He was a 32nd.
He was injured for a while, too. I mean.
Yeah, no, definitely. But it's also a thing where these guys, when the safeties come up to play the run, then they have their advantage because these guys have big arms. Kaepernick has a big arm. When he went to the Super Bowl in 2012, Frank Gore had over 1,200 yards rushing. I mean, they had a really good run game. They had a really good offensive line too. Kaepernick on the Jets, I don't see a fit there because of one thing. We don't really know who our running back's going to be. If Ivory comes back, I can see it working. I guess a little bit of read option. But if Ivory's gone, we're not going to have really a running game to go on. So we're going to need a quarterback to throw 60 to 65% of the time, do a little dink and dunking. Kaepernick, I don't think, can do that.
But Fitzpatrick can? I mean, Fitzpatrick's arm is significantly, less versatile than Colin Kaepernick. I mean...
But Fitzpatrick has touch in the short game, I think, is something that he does better than Kaepernick. I think he's able to be a little bit more deceptive, throw a screen here. I mean, you saw it with Powell. I mean, the last time I saw a running back do what Powell did was Leon Washington when he was on the Jets. I mean, we haven't had a third down back it seems like in 6-7 years here, and it comes down to the quarterback. I mean, Sanchez couldn't do that. Sanchez couldn't be a little deceptive, look left, do a little dump off right, understands the flow of the defense to dink and dunk. Kaepernick can't do that. I don't think he can. I've seen him play. He doesn't really understand where to go. If you give him a first read and say, hey, this guy's going to run a 30-yard post route, and you're going to zip it right there, and you're going to roll out that direction, I mean, yeah, he'll throw it the best of them, but when the game gets a little bit more complex and you have to read defenses and running backs out of the backfield, I just don't see Kaepernick working in that type of system. I think if you get him a great running back, Kaepernick, and you run the ball well, and he's your play action rollout kind of guy, he can be successful.
But Frankie, don't you think his ability to run and keep defenses honest will make any running back better? I mean, Frank Gore was at the tail end of his career, and when he left, he didn't really do all that much without Colin Kaepernick. So it's
I was
not
just going to say,
exactly
using both of your points, is if you're going to bring in someone like a Colin Kaepernick, who is a mobile quarterback, it's almost ideal for the New York Jets because you have 2 of your 3 starting running backs. And I say starting because it's an absolute carousel in New York for who's starting at running back.
Really, all of them are free agents. It's just I assume they'll bring back Bilal
And
Powell.
my point is that it's all going to be shaken up this offseason, so now they get to handpick what they want that 1A, 1B quarterback, running back, run game combination to be.
And to me, Colin Kaepernick will make the run game better, whereas Ryan Fitzpatrick, He's just your generic
He has the
stopgap
ability
quarterback.
to make the run game better.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's not
I
completely
think
proven.
I see a cause and effect on the other side though. I think the running game makes Kaepernick better more than Kaepernick makes the running game. I think a running game needs to be in place for Kaepernick to be successful. I'll give you an example of a guy that used to play in Philly, LaShawn McCoy, Carlos Williams in Buffalo. They made Tyrod Taylor better, a scrambler type, a guy that can move outside the pocket. A running game like that will benefit Tyrod Taylor. If you put Tyrod Taylor on the Jets, let's say, with even a running game this year. Granted, Ivory actually did lead the AFC in rushing, which was crazy to think about.
Considering he had like 4 good games at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, yeah. I just think with those scrambler, when you look at a quarterbacks that have those big arms, like Tyrod Taylor, you see that big arm he has. Like, it's just those guys, when you have a running game, I think it helps them a lot. And I don't know. We'll see what happens with Kaepernick. I didn't like him out of college, and I was wrong. And I don't know if I'm right now. Whatever. It doesn't really make a difference. But I thought his arm was just a little too much mustard on everything. Like, you need to, like, I don't know. I personally, I like the guys that kind of like dink and dunk kind of guys. It's just me, but I don't know. We'll see. I mean, if I had to pick, it's tough. Fitzpatrick's the conservative play, and to counter argument against Fitz is when he played really well in Buffalo and got that big contract,
He turned around
stunk
and
up
was
the
garbage.
joint after.
Yeah.
I mean, like, people don't want to talk about a guy that went to Harvard, having this mentality, but hey, we always talk about guys like like we'll talk about an Alshon Jeffrey playing for a contract, but we're not talking for Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick played for a contract this year. He studied a little bit more, put in a little bit more effort, did a little, play with a little bit more, kahunas for that contract this year. So the fact that that's not being discussed, don't get that twisted, because it's quite clear that he wanted a contract and he played for it. Now, if you give him the deal, the 2 years, 3 years, whatever you're going to give him, will he keep playing like he did this year? Will he
More
put
than
in
likely
extra
not.
time?
I mean, when he got the big contract in Buffalo, he turned around and he was trash. And
Yeah.
he only seems to play well when he's coming in as a backup. Rich, I would say our first Fan Dings argument is a pretty solid success. Got some heat out of us.
It's a good debate.
Yeah, I mean it's a valid question. I mean I didn't think anyone besides you, Craig, would be on Kaepernick's side, but it seems like there's arguments for both. Let me just put it this way: if the Jets draft Ezekiel Elliott, I'm all for Kaepernick. But on that note, we'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Hey Craig, have you heard about this new company, the Sports Gaming Association?
No, who are they?
Well, they host esports events, and they're starting their own sports news network online. You know how you're always telling me how great you are at Madden and NBA 2K?
Of course, my game is top notch.
Well, now you can prove it. Go to sportsgamingassociation.com and check out their schedule. They're adding new events every day.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna check that out.
While you're at it, you can buy authentic jerseys there too. That way you can represent at your next event. They have events coming up in Milwaukee, Chicago, Philly, and Harrisburg, plus more coming soon. Check them out at sportsgamingassociation.com. Welcome back to the Code Green Radio Show. Since this is Yahoo Sports Philly, I think it's perfect time to jump right into the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles did a lot of stuff recently. It went from a coach, and then a lot of extensions, and then even, a cut that was surprising to some. They named Doug Peterson as their head coach on the 18th. They named Jim Schwartz as their defensive coordinator on the 19th. John DeFilippo as their quarterback's coach on the 21st. They're on a roll with what they're doing. Extended Zach Ertz for 5 years. Agreed to terms with Brent Selleck on a 3-year deal. Agreed to terms with Lane Johnson on a 6-year contract, and Vinnie Curry on a 5-year contract. And then the surprising cut of Riley Cooper 2 days ago. So, I mean, Alex, since you are our resident Eagles writer, fan, everything, the floor is yours, man.
The
What do you think
everything's
about
a
all
nice
this?
touch. I'm just throwing that one out there. The everything really hits home. I'm going to start with Coop, and I don't want to say it's a surprise because he was, in essence, a number 3 to number 5 receiver getting paid number 2 money. It was a whole lot of dough for a year that was an effect of having Deshaun Jackson on the other side, taking away both the corner and the safety. a very healthy and a productive Nick Foles. And just, he lucked out. He had a really great season in that initial year with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he warranted a overly healthy contract, and he had yet to perform up to those exact standards that he had set himself, and because of that, he's been cut, and rightfully so. Touching on the new coaches, I'm really excited about this. Doug Peterson, as the head coach, led the Kansas City Chiefs last year to number 6 in rushing, and this is without Jamal Charles. I think we should all be making a point of that. He really wanted to bring in Frank Reich as the offensive coordinator. He was the OC in San Diego, who led the Chargers to number 4 in passing, and it was also the most injured team in football in 2015.
Maybe a toss-up between them and the Ravens, but you're absolutely right. A
But
decimated
to still
injury.
go number 4 in passing by
very
any
impressive.
means is incredible, especially with that offensive line, giving Rivers enough time to drop back and drop said passes. And then you bring in Schwartz to implement the 4-3 defense after
Love
you
the
spend.
hire.
Loved that pick, even if it wasn't. There's a debate on whether or not that was Jeffrey Lurie, the owner's hire, or was Pedersen's. But they get along right now, which is a great start. And he'll be implementing his 4-3. The Eagles are returning back to that after serving 3 years as a 3-4 defense. And when Schwartz was last time serving as a coordinator was in 2007 and 2008, and previous years before that. But in his last final 2 years with the Tennessee Titans, they were ranked number 8 in total defense, or in points allowed, and number 2 in his last year in 2008.
And then don't forget his time in Buffalo as a coordinator as well.
And that was a very potent defense with the pieces that he didn't exactly have time to get warm and fuzzy and cozy with either.
He took them pretty far. I mean, they got after the quarterback in a hurry with that defense.
And you touched on it, Rich, a little bit, bringing John DeFilippo in as the quarterback's coach. Both the head coach, the offensive coordinator, and the quarterback's coach are all former NFL quarterbacks. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, the thing that I'm seeing that not any of the teams have done so far is they're taking care of their own early. Every day in the offseason you would see something about the Eagles. I mean, if it was Zach Ertz or Selleck or Lane Johnson or Curry, like I said earlier, they're getting that stuff out of the way. They know the core of their team. They want to build around them, and they're going to give them what they deserve. And I think that's great for the rapport of the team. I think it's great for free agents that are going to come to Philadelphia, seeing that if you do good on the team, you're going to get rewarded. On the flip side of that, I mean, the Jets, not to totally go off course, but the Jets, I mean, you look at the same situation with Muhammad Wilkerson, and, I wish that the Jets went this route that the Eagles took. Just get it out of the way instead of waiting till the last second or even franchise tagging. But Frankie, what do you think about all the happenings that are going on in Philly right now?
I do like them all. I do like them. I think that I think Doug Peterson has a lot to prove, and I think he's the type of guy to want to go in there and just get to work. And there is something to be said about some of these offensive coaches in the sense of I like the fact that they have a mind for offense, and as you see this league going more and more towards just teams throwing for 350 yards a game, you're going to need a coach who understands how to do that. And I think Doug Peterson does get that. And what he did with Alex Smith was incredible. I think he did a great job there. The thing that's going to separate Doug Peterson from other offensive coordinators who've tried to coach is he able to motivate the team? That's what's going to come into play here. I thought Schwartz was a great hire on the defensive side because talk about a motivator, a rah-rah kind of guy. That guy will be good to have in a locker room to get the defensive guys going. Will Peterson be able to play off of that and really bring this team together? That'll be the question. I think that the Eagles have a good roster. I do. I think they have some good pieces there. I think even on defense, they have some guys that can make plays and even get to the quarterback. I mean, they have some pieces there. Now it's time for them to really just bring everyone together become unified, because as you saw what happened with Chip, it was all over the place, and you didn't really know what was going on, where was the team going. So I like the fact that they kind of have a little bit of an identity now. We're going to come in with a quarterbacks guy and a coach who understands offense and knows how to even run the football. Then on the defensive side, we want to just get rah-rah with it. We want to be aggressive, and we want to make plays. So I think that's good. So I think from an identity standpoint, Philly's doing the right thing. Now they have to worry about the quarterback, because that's what it comes down to. You know, I'm a Jets fan, and it's always about the quarterback. We finally had a good one, and we had a good year, 10-6. Will Philadelphia be able to find a quarterback? And I'll kind of segue into this, and you guys can kind of run with this. But I don't think Sam Bradford's that guy. I've never have thought he was. Doug Peterson's come out and said that he's even interested in maybe bringing back Nick Foles potentially back to Philly. So I read that on Sports Illustrated. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to see maybe what you guys think about that. But that is what it's going to come down to. My opinion, though, Peterson does fit the type of quarterback Bradford is. Bradford reminds me of Alex Smith a little bit, besides for the scramble ability. He, very similar style, I would say. We'll see what happens, though. That's the biggest question mark going into Philly season. Who's at the helm? Who's the quarterback? And do we trust this guy? And who is he? Because I don't think we know that right now.
Now, bouncing off of what you said before we even touch on quarterbacks, I just want to mention, like Rich said, Lane Johnson, Vinny Curry, Zach Ertz, and Brent Selleck had all received contract extensions. Just to touch briefly on that, Lane Johnson is kind of the middle ground of being paid as a right tackle and a left tackle, and has a clause that he will get more money if he has to switch positions, which from what we've seen last year with the injuries to Jason Peters, that is a very fair contract. Vinny Curry has a new deal, I believe, for the next 5 years. I know he signed through to 2020. Gets to go back to playing a defensive end, not being that heavy-set outside linebacker. Gets to stuff the run and go after the quarterback. Zach Ertz, I feel with his contract, they deemed him as the franchise tight end, even though they have given Selleck a retirement contract. I think if you are in the process of rebuilding an O-line, which I feel the Philadelphia Eagles will be doing, at least with one tackle position as well as both guard positions, you want to lock up the league's best blocking tight end. And with all these signings on the offensive side of the ball, Ertz, Selleck, Lane Johnson, and there have been talks about Trey Burton, keeping him there as the third tight end as well as the H-back option. It almost seems like they're setting up this offense to be a plug-and-play for a quarterback. I know that it's never that simple, but do you guys feel that's almost the way, take care of every other aspect of the offense and worry about the quarterback last?
I think that it's a fair point of view, and especially when there's so many question marks around, one, is the guy we have even the right guy that we want? Is Sam Bradford the right guy? And with so many question marks with guys in the draft, I mean, you've seen teams reach in the draft. A couple of seasons ago, the Vikings took Christian Ponder first round. He wasn't a first-round pick, but you know what? They needed a quarterback, and they were like, hey, let's give it a shot. And it didn't work out, and now they have Teddy Bridgewater, and they're back on the right path. But that could have really, hurt them more than it did. So, and that's just one example out of many. So I think getting the team set for success is a solid strategy, and I like that they're taking care of their own and they're solidifying where they can, so that when they find the right quarterback, the team is pretty much ready to go. And then just one note about Doug Peterson that I didn't get the chance to say before. He's used to the Philly area. He was here before with Andy Reid.
I also wanted to make a point, not to derail too quickly. The big emphasis on this new coaching hire is returning to the roots of the Andy Reid era and bringing back all these guys that are familiar and love the city of Philadelphia. And
to me, that's going to be a big advantage for his ability to motivate this team, because he knows Philadelphia. He knows what works in Philly and what doesn't work in Philly. And I like the strategy of getting the rest of the team ready for the quarterback. It's sort of what the New York Jets did, bringing in talent, and then, eventually, they found Ryan Fitzpatrick, who was a decent enough trigger man to get them a 10-6 record.
I think this is very important, just based on the coach they just had. If you look at this, it's the complete opposite of what Chip Kelly did. He kind of gutted the veteran players, the players that everyone liked. I mean, the core players, he kind of just gutted and went his own way. I think Doug Peterson with these signings is not only winning back the team, he's winning back the city of Philadelphia. Just when a coach comes in and completely cleans house and it doesn't work out, you need to save those pieces
What's
that
left?
can win you games. I think Doug Peterson has a plan. I think he's doing it the right way, and just based on Chip Kelly, I mean, you saw Chip Kelly go to San Francisco, and he couldn't find a defensive coordinator for a month. No one wanted to work for him because no one knows what he's going to do to that team. Granted, the 49ers right now don't have much to destruct besides Carlos Hyde because everyone retired on that team, but it speaks volumes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this coaching staff.
And to that
in
point, I just really,
Philadelphia- Sorry, Frankie, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to make a point. I think to what you're saying, you're absolutely right. But we have to consider something with Philadelphia. That fan base right now, they're not ready for another, let's have someone come in and figure things out again. I mean, like, they went through hell with Chip Kelly and what happened there. We didn't really get to see Chip Kelly, what was going to be of him at the end of the day. I think a little bit prematurely he was let go. And I'm not saying it was a bad thing. It should have happened, I think, to a certain point. I would have maybe kept him for another year, but hey, I don't know what the circumstances were in that locker room, so it's totally legitimate if, the things got so bad that they couldn't even see him going in there and leading anyone for another season. It may have even been worse than it was this year. But the thing about this is getting a quarterback, and the Jets, we got lucky with Fitzpatrick, I would say. Like, Geno got his jaw broken. He was our backup. He came in. I mean, it was a really weird, semi-fortunate almost situation of how that all happened. But drafting a quarterback, I've learned being in football and doing this, looking at quarterbacks on YouTube and stuff like that. I mean, like, it's one of the hardest things, drafting a quarterback and scouting one or even trying to predict one. I mean, if you go from 2009 until now, quarterbacks that were drafted pick 5 to pick 25 since 2009, okay? If you go down the list, you have quarterbacks that aren't even playing at this point. Some have retired. You have Manziel, Manuel, Tannehill. He's the only good one out of the group. Whedon, Locker, Gabbert, Ponder, Tebow, Sanchez, and Freeman. Those are quarterbacks that have been drafted 5 to 25 picks since 2009, first rounders. And none of those guys are even, besides for Tannehill, are doing really anything. So to think that Philadelphia is going to go into the draft and find their future quarterback, I will say this, good luck. It's a crapshoot. So I think if they like Nick Foles and Peterson likes Nick Foles, they should go with Nick Foles. The fans will like Nick Foles.
I don't know about Nick Foles, Frankie. I agree that the draft isn't exactly their best option, but Nick Foles, I would rather them get Chase Daniel, the backup from Kansas City, than see Nick
really?
Foles. I really would.
You would rather have Chase Daniels than Nick Foles.
Nick Foles,
I find that very hard to believe.
No, I'm not a fan of Foles anymore, unfortunately.
Well, guys, we already did the Fan Digs debate of the night, so on that note, there's going to be a lot of rumors circulating in the offseason, and we have a lot more weeks to talk. So why don't we just save it for next week? But we have one more topic to talk about. We'll be right back. Why buy new when you can buy pre-owned?
Skip the depreciation.
At Apollo Auto Sales, they have over 220 cars, ranging from $40,000 all the way down to $2,000.
Yes, you heard that right. $2,000.
Visit ApolloPreowned.com or call 856-881-2869. That number again is 856-881-2869.
Ask for Joey. Apollo treats you like family.
Their prices are sick. Welcome back to Yahoo Sports Philly Code Green radio show. We're here on 1360 AM, and let's talk about the Jets right now. This is a Jets and Eagles show. Every year, obviously, after the season ends, teams sign future contracts with players, and the Jets have been busy. The Jets are pushing 20 players that they added to their roster. So for the casual fan, you guys might not know a lot of these players that we're about to mention, but they can make waves. Like a Damon Harrison came from this. So let's go down the list of players that might actually contribute. The first one for me is a wide receiver by the name of Joe Anderson. Joe Anderson is 6'1", 196 out of Texas Southern. He used to play for the Chicago Bears.
And for anyone who's a little confused about who Joe Anderson is, there was a story that broke a couple of months ago about a man standing outside the Houston Texans facility with a sign saying, "I want to play football. Sign me to your team." Basically, I'm ad-libbing. And he ended up ending the season on the Jets practice squad. And he has all the measurables of a guy who can play some really good wideout.
And he's very, very fast. If you want to look at his YouTube videos, I mean, his videos are intense to say the least. He seems like he has all the heart that Brandon Marshall does. Maybe it's
and
a
they're
Chicago
friends.
Bears thing.
They're friends.
Exactly. The next one for me, Brandon Bostic. He's a tight end formerly of the Packers, 6'3", 250.
He's the guy that botched that onside kick.
You're going to steal him all,
I
Craig?
wonder why that name sounded familiar.
I'm sorry, I just gotta, throw in case anyone's not familiar. 'Cause some of these guys are a little,
Yeah, I got it. I mean,
I think it's working well. I think keep doing that, honestly.
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, in the Seattle Seahawks game, on the onside kick, Brandon Bostic botched it completely, causing the Packers to lose the game, and Seattle went on to the Super Bowl. So let's try not to think of that when he's playing for the team. Jarvis Harrison re-signed. He was our fifth rounder last year. Wes Saxton, he was active one game against Miami and London. He was on the practice squad all year. 6'4", 235 tight end, also back with the team. Adrian Robertson, tight end, another tight end, since Shane Gailey doesn't use tight ends, so let's sign
have a
8
million of them.
Yes. 6'4", 264 out of Cincinnati, formerly of the Giants. He was actually a fourth-round pick in 2012 for the Giants, and he just couldn't get going. And a weird signing for the Jets is Kyle Brinza. He's the former kicker for the Lions and the Bucks out of Notre Dame. He went 6 for 12 with field goals last year and 6 of 8 of extra points. He'll be fighting it out with Nick Folk, and I guess probably Nick Folk's going to win. Nick Folk should win. If Nick Folk doesn't win, then there's something
Then his
wrong.
injury is pretty bad.
Yes,
basically.
And there's two more big signings. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be big or not, but on the surface, to me, they seem big. All last year, the Jets did not have a kick or a punt returner, and it cost them a lot. It cost them field position. It cost them
a win against Buffalo for certain.
This was something that was very apparent throughout numerous games in this season.
Yes. So, for some reason, after the season, the Jets have signed Dre Archer, formerly of the Steelers. Yeah, he was a third rounder in 2014. Primarily, he's going to be a kick returner, maybe some gadget plays at running back with Shane Gailey, depending on what running backs come back. If Chris Ivory and Bilal Powell comes back, obviously he might not get a lot of snaps. And even so, I don't know if he's going to get a lot of snaps. He seems strictly the kick return specialist for the team right now, because if you look at the roster, there's no one else. We have Jeremy Curley, but Jeremy Curley, he's a fan of fair catches. I think it's like 89%. I'm making up numbers here, but to me, it seems that high.
It's pretty much every time he's back there. And
Pretty
then,
much every time.
Devin Smith, if maybe he gets some time in training camp, could be good on special teams, but his whole rookie season was pretty much just marred by injury.
While we're still on the subject of, before we get to the next Jets signing, because this was a perfect opportunity, I feel, when the Jets, a team that has not had very luck in the special teams department, excluding Nick Folk, is it worth signing just someone who does punt and kick returns?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
That's
Absolutely.
their sole job. It's worth signing someone.
You know what?
And even if it is on the little on the pricey
It's a valuable position in the NFL. I mean, any stage of football.
You got to look at how many offensive linemen the Jets carried last year. If one of those people, was a kick returner instead, it could have been a big difference. They had an obnoxious amount of offensive linemen on that team. They gotta be able to move people around. If it's not working, you gotta fix it. I mean, it didn't work. Having Cromartie back there, I mean, Cromartie was probably the best kick returner that the Jets had last year, and he wasn't that good himself at that job. I would definitely dedicate I would dedicate a role to a Dre Archer strictly to return kicks and punts. Let's say you sign someone like a Percy Harvin. And let's say the Jets bring back Percy Harvin, and he's a wide receiver, kick returner, punt returner. That's like a perfect role. There's not a lot of players like that. So I mean,
there's
at
all the
this point,
Tyler
I would.
Locketts and the Darren Sproles, but I just wanted to
I would be in
touch on-
favor of signing Percy Harvin specifically for the kick return, punt return role, and sprinkle him in for a wide receiver screen here or there. I'd be okay with that signing.
I'd also be all right with signing Darren Sproles, but that would be a little greedy.
But
All
right now we have Dre Archer, and
yeah, exactly.
He was a third-round pick. He had a lot of potential. We haven't seen too much out of him yet, but maybe he might be the guy. Who knows? We'll find out as the off-season progresses and we get into training camp.
Yeah, and the good thing about these future contracts is it's literally no risk, all reward. You see what they do, and then you go as they go. The last one is actually a 2-year contract. I don't know if you guys know this guy. His name is Freddie Bishop, formerly the CFL. He actually won the Grey Cup this year, and his stats were like pretty impressive. He
14
visited 7
sacks.
teams before picking the Jets, and I think Craig has a breakdown of his stats.
Yeah, so, just talking about his career real quick, Freddie Bishop, he signed with the Detroit Lions in in 2013 after he went undrafted. He was then released in June of that year. He goes to the CFL, the Calgary Stampeders, on the practice squad. He makes his way to the roster, and they end up winning the Grey Cup, which is the CFL championship. In his career, he had 60 tackles and 14 sacks and a forced fumble. And, that's a short number of years, and the CFL game is significantly more offensive than defensive. So just the fact that he was able to rack up that amount of numbers, to me it's a good signing. And at the outside linebacker position, a position of desperate need for the Jets, possibly, should everything pan out, Freddie Bishop and Lorenzo Malden on the outside, if they're both good players, and it could be a really dangerous duo on the outside. And before anyone goes, well, it's CFL, we don't know. It worked out for the Dolphins with Cameron Wake. I mean, sometimes you get some talented guys from the CFL.
And sometimes you miss on Leonard Floyd. Let's just not digress to the draft, but the Jets are probably going to go either offensive line or linebacker, or if Ezekiel Elliott's there, like every Jet fan wants. But linebacker, I would say, is the biggest need that they have right now. So if you just add an arsenal of linebackers for cheap, I'm all for it. Add 30 of these guys. See which one sticks. That's how you got to do it. And the good thing is, on the practice squad, they have linebackers ready to go.
Now, Craig, you made a point of this, and you didn't touch on his size. The dude's 6'4", 264. That's already NFL height and weight requirements. There's no, come and put a few more pounds of muscle. That's damn near prototype.
He's been playing pro ball. He's been a professional football player for the past couple of years.
I don't know
in
if
Canada.
you call it Pro Bowl in Canada, but you made the mention that, it could be Cam Wake Part 2. Here's the thing that Cam Wake actually mentioned in NFL's Top 100 last year. In the CFL, there has to be a full yard between the line of scrimmage where the center snaps the ball and the defensive line. If he comes in and he's allowed to do what Cam did and crouch up on the ball as much as possible with the speed and ability to get 14 sacks and 60 tackles, those aren't, fluffy numbers. Those are hard, bruising numbers.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the signing, and I'm a fan of a good story as well. Maybe I'm a sucker for it, but I think he's a guy who could actually make a pretty big difference in this New York Jet defense.
As long as he doesn't end up like, and I just want to jump in here, as long as he doesn't end up like Hayden Smith, who, if you remember, I know Rich remembers this guy. Hayden Smith came from Australia, big rugby player, was supposed to be this next big tight end, got into the NFL, and was a little nervous out there, a little bit hesitant. And I think that'll make the difference with a guy like Freddie Bishop being able to really, be a player that can play 50, 60% of snaps in a game. Is he not worried? Is he not scared? Is he not hesitating on the field? Is he fearless? If he can prove that he's fearless and runs around and makes plays, I think if you look at DeMario Davis, for example. DeMario Davis, who's an unrestricted free agent, by the way, and the Jets have a ton of these guys: Wilkerson, Fitzpatrick, Ivory, Harrison, Pace, Powell. I mean, like, the list keeps going on and on. The amount of unrestricted free agents we have. DeMario's one of them, and DeMario did not have a great year because you see him hesitating. He'll go, a running back will do a little shake and bake, and then, he's done. I mean, you even saw the guy on Philly's running back. What's his name? Matthews.
You're right, Frankie. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so I guess we'll have to save that little ditty for next week.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, guys, that was a great first show. And, I was Rich Wilhelm, your host. We had Craig Gorbunoff with me, Alexander Hand, and Frankie Vittorini. And remember, bleed green or don't bother bleeding.